Bullying led to a girl in a wheelchair being thrown to the ground. Just half an hour later, a seemingly ordinary black girl stood before the entire student body and orchestrated a reckoning. They believed their action, tipping a girl in a wheelchair in the central courtyard, accompanied by laughter and dismissive glances, would silence any dissent. They were mistaken. Within 30 minutes, an unremarkable, everyday black girl, lacking status or recognition, stepped forward. Not through aggression or shouting, but with a quiet, unwavering strategy. Before everyone, she compelled those who previously paraded with arrogance to lower their heads in shame. This is more than a tale of getting even. It's a narrative of courage, clear determination, and how one individual's voice, even when soft, can command attention and shift an entire dynamic. You will never perceive silence the same way again. 13-year-old Trinity Hayes sat still in her gray wheelchair, a lavender backpack draped casually over one handle. The stream of students flowing past didn't include her. None paused to join her. They moved around her like she was an unmoving object, a streetlight. It wasn't that Trinity lacked capability or spirit. She excelled academically, always ahead on assignments, offering thoughtful contributions in science, and possessed a bright, infectious laugh her music teacher once described as the kind that brightens your afternoon. But she didn't fit Jefferson High's typical profile. One built for tall, white students from privileged backgrounds who didn't need wheels to navigate. Trinity lives with spina bifida, a congenital condition that affects spinal development. She's never known running or jumping, but she requires no one's pity. For her, the wheelchair isn't a deficit. It's as much a part of her as her shoes, glasses, or hair, and she's accepted it. Yet Trinity's presence was often overlooked by most students, whether deliberately or not. There was no open hostility, but a form of being rendered invisible. No one engaged her in conversation, no one invited her to gym games, no one offered assistance when rain made walkways slick. Trinity had grown accustomed to it. She remained in place, watching the lively crowd enter the building. Some classmates hurried by laden with books. Others scrolled on their phones. A few boys kicked an empty plastic bottle as if playing a championship match. One or two brushed her wheels without sparing a glance. A breeze ruffled the ends of Trinity's hair, creeping under the collar of her white polo shirt. She pulled her sleeve down, fixing her gaze on the distant school entrance, only yards away but feeling like miles. Those doors weren't just access to classrooms. They led to staircases, hushed gossip, and sometimes cruel expressions. Trinity didn't fear the classroom. She feared the transitional spaces. The blind corners of stairwells, the unnamed pranks dismissed as harmless fun. That morning, a peculiar unease settled in her chest, a premonition. Her inexpensive digital watch emitted 3 gentle beeps. Time for homeroom. She pushed a wheel forward, then another roll. She had no idea that within the next 10 minutes her chair would be overturned, her books scattered across the tiled floor, and the sound of mockery would ring out behind her. But from that indignity, a subtle shift would begin, not with an explosion, but with a single person rising. A tremor known as a Mia Cross. The school doors were still less than 10 chair pushes away when, as Trinity's hands gripped the wheel rims, a large shadow fell over the path ahead. Chad Benson, nearly 6 feet tall despite being only in 8th grade, stood there. His imposing build, shaped by years on the football field, his jaw square, hair neatly cut, eyes narrowed into a dismissive smirk, always seemingly ready to judge everyone around him. Chad didn't need to shout to dominate. His mere presence seemed to thicken the air. Behind him were his usual companions. Hunter Sloan, blonde with a grin suggesting he found everything a joke, and Mike Radley, quieter, whose eyes seemed to catalog every pained expression to later mock in the boys' restroom. The 3 formed a solid barrier, blocking Trinity's access ramp. Chad folded his arms, looking down at her wheelchair as if inspecting a defective item. "Move, please," Trinity said, her voice quiet yet firm. She didn't expect them to obey. She was simply calming herself. Hunter burst into laughter. "Hey Chad, imagine strapping a rocket to that thing. She might actually get to class on time without losing her poise." Mike added a high-pitched mocking squeal with every small movement Trinity made, a tiresome imitation he'd perfected over 2 months in math class. Chad remained silent. He leaned forward slowly, his hand grasping the front axle of Trinity's chair. His eyes shifted from playful malice to a cold, hollow self-satisfaction. "Let me assist you," he whispered. Before Trinity could react, he lifted the chair's front a few inches, enough to completely disrupt her balance. Trinity tipped sideways, reaching out to the floor to steady herself. But the wheel was askew, sending her full weight to one side. Her wheelchair crashed onto the cold tile with a harsh, echoing clang that instantly silenced nearby students. Her fall was more than just physical. It was a blow to her dignity. She didn't cry out. No tears fell. She simply lay there, eyes fixed on the muted sky above, her backpack sliding off a shoulder, her books scattered around her. A copy of To Kill a Mockingbird lay open in the breeze, as if even its pages recoiled. Hunter nudged Chad and chuckled, "Smooth move, bro." Mike joined in the laughter. A few onlookers covered their mouths. Others turned away. Silence. No one offered help. That silence, it was complicity. Chad stood there, impassive, a satisfied nod on his face. To him, Trinity wasn't a person. She was an object to be kept firmly in what he believed was her place. Chad's cruelty wasn't accidental. It was cultivated. His father served on the school board. His mother owned a luxury spa in the upscale Vestavia suburbs. The Benson family had funded the school gymnasium, and the words Benson Family Court gleamed on a brass plaque in the sports complex. Chad never faced repercussions for rough play on the field, never received a reprimand for swearing at the PE teacher. To many adults at Jefferson, Chad was a future leader, just a little spirited. Trinity understood all of this. It was why she didn't scream, didn't plead. Here, her voice from her wheelchair wasn't loud enough to pierce the wall of honor roll plaques. Instead, she whispered something so soft only she could hear it. Perhaps a silent wish, perhaps a quiet vow. At that moment, a pair of dark Converse sneakers stepped down from bus 12. They paused, then moved quickly through the crowd that had gathered around Trinity like flies drawn to pain. A clear voice cut through the air. "Enjoying yourselves, boys?" The entire schoolyard froze. Amia Cross had arrived. "Having fun, are you?" The voice sliced through the quiet like a sharp blade. It wasn't loud or harsh, but it carried an unseen force that stopped the bullies cold and made the students who had turned away glance back. Amia Cross stood tall, backpack still over one shoulder, an oversized denim jacket falling past her hips, her braided hair coiled neatly into a crown bun. Her eyes were fixed on Chad Benson like someone observing a caged predator. She wasn't a prominent student, no honor roll, no club photos. Compete not for points but for team spirit. But for Amia Cross, this wasn't just a friendly competition. It was her platform, her catalyst, her clear call for truth. She stood at the edge of the field, clipboard in hand, observing every movement with quiet intensity. A breeze lifted a few strands of her hair. Her gaze flicked towards Coach Ramirez, busy coordinating officials but giving a subtle nod of approval. The teams had been rearranged as requested. Red Team, Amia's team, emerged from the staging area, each member wearing a matching Unity t-shirt. When Chad Benson, Hunter Sloan, and Mike Radley saw they would be competing under Amia's leadership, the three nearly froze. "Wait, she's the captain?" Mike stammered. "No way," Hunter grimaced. Chad said nothing, but his eyes hardened as he understood this was no longer his territory. Amia turned slowly as she heard them approach. Her eyes settled on Chad, conveying a clear, silent message. "Welcome to my arena." "Welcome to Red Team," she said calmly. "We are one unit now. If anyone objects, you're free to leave. But if you stay, you commit to playing seriously." Chad snorted. "Fine, I'll play, but don't expect me to take orders from you." "I don't require your obedience," Amia replied. "I require your cooperation." She turned away, leaving the three bullies standing stunned in the middle of the field, like players realizing they were in a chess game where the opposing side had already made strategic moves. The whistle blew. The other teams lined up at the perimeter, green, yellow, orange, purple, and red. The only team captained by a black girl who wasn't on any sports roster. Coach Ramirez strode to the center of the field with a microphone and announced the rules for the final event, the obstacle relay. Each team has 4 members. The first runner clears the soft hurdles. The second completes the sack race. The third shoots the basketball through the hoop. And the fourth will face the most challenging task, pushing a wheelchair through a 30-meter zigzag course, with a passenger holding the relay baton. A ripple of conversation spread through the spectators. Some quiet chuckles. Oh, that looks tough, from the green team. But the crowd fell silent when Amia spoke again. The person in the wheelchair will be Trinity Hayes. Heads turned in unison. Trinity sat at the edge of the field, her navy and purple uniform crisp, her elbows still bandaged, her eyes steady and resolute. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She simply wheeled herself into the designated waiting zone. Chad's stance stiffened. He glared at Amia. What? You're pushing her. Amia's words landed like hammer strikes. Me? Why not you? His voice cracked higher than usual, strained with tension. I've done my part. Amia shrugged. Now it's your turn to do what you've always avoided. Face her. Hunter hesitated to laugh, seeing the strain on Chad's face. Mike took a step back, unwilling to get involved. Every student in the stands had witnessed the morning incident. Teachers lined the course. Several held up phones to record. There was no retreat. The whistle blew again. The relay began. Hunter darted forward, clearing the hurdles in a blur. Chad slapped Hunter's hand for the baton exchange. Mike moved through the sack race, clumsy but determined, finally reaching the line. Amia caught the baton and threw the basketball in a smooth arc. Swish. Right through the net. Cheers erupted. Everything was going according to plan. Then came the final segment. Chad took the baton, breathing hard. Trinity waited, calm and silent, as if this were just any morning. Yet something in her gaze held Chad unable to look away. Perhaps it was her stillness. Perhaps it was the fact that she required nothing from him to prove anything about herself. Here's the baton, Chad stammered. Just push straight, Trinity replied, placing her small hand on the wheel rim. The route ahead was challenging. Traffic cones, hidden obstacles, patches of gravel. Chad pushed. The wheelchair swayed. Slower. The chair is tilting, Trinity whispered. Chad steadied the wheels, sweat beading on his palms. He was accustomed to giving commands, never receiving them from someone he considered beneath him. At least that's what he had always believed. Meter by meter, the roar of the crowd swelled on both sides. They neared the finish line. Amia shouted, "Go Trinity!" Trinity raised the baton high, the late afternoon sun illuminating her face, no longer merely a symbol of vulnerability but an emblem of quiet resilience. When they crossed the line, Chad stopped, breathing heavily, speechless. Trinity didn't smile. Instead she looked at Amia, then up at the vast sky overhead, the same sky she had stared at that morning in silent resolve. Now she had risen not on her own legs, but through her unwavering presence. A steady wave of applause rippled from the stands, quiet but persistent, like a shared heartbeat that began the moment Trinity and Chad crossed the finish line. They had won. The wheelchair slowed to a stop just past the final white stripe, and Trinity held the relay baton aloft like a torch. A breeze played with her hair and the late sun broke through thinning clouds, spotlighting her clenched hand in golden light, proud, composed. Behind her, Chad stood motionless, his hands still on the wheelchair's push handles. He was panting, but this time it wasn't from exertion. It was confusion. For the first time in his school life, Chad Benson wasn't the one receiving cheers. He wasn't being celebrated. He wasn't the focus of attention because every gaze, students, teachers, even parents gathered at the field's edge, was fixed on Trinity. Not just because she finished first but because of the way she carried herself after everything that had happened. Still upright, still steady, never looking down. She didn't smile. She didn't nod a thank you. She didn't wave back at the crowd. Yet that very quiet presence drew the audience to their feet, row by row, as if they universally understood they had witnessed something too significant to ignore. Amia stepped forward, coming up behind Chad, her eyes passing over him to rest on Trinity, and announced clearly, "We have our winner." She turned to the event coordinators. As agreed, the winning team gets to send one member to lunch with the principal. Principal Gaines stood at the field's edge, his pale blue shirt slightly wrinkled, sunglasses on his forehead. He looked at Amia and nodded the official confirmation. Chad swallowed. His back was slick with sweat, his hands trembling slightly. But the emotion surging through him wasn't exhaustion. It was an unfamiliar sting of embarrassment. He, accustomed to victory and accolades, had just spent the final stretch pushing the wheelchair of the very girl he had knocked over that morning, in front of the entire school. And the most startling part? No one defended him. No mocking remarks from his friends, No forced laughter from those who usually deferred to him. Just silence and a few pairs of eyes evaluating him anew, as if reassessing the entirety of Chad Benson. Behind him, Hunter Sloan stared at the ground. Mike Radley pulled out his phone, only to switch off the screen, unwilling to record another moment. No more congratulatory pats on the back. No more good job, Chad. Because he was no longer Chad the Conqueror. Amia knelt beside Trinity. Who do you choose for lunch with the principal? Trinity turned her head, her eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Amia. You. Amia smiled softly. No high scores posted publicly. But anyone who knew her understood Amia didn't need volume to be heard. She possessed a quiet authority that commanded attention the moment she stirred, and now it was fully engaged. She moved through the hushed crowd gathered around Trinity. No one attempted to block her. No one spoke. As she knelt to help Trinity, her hand brushing the scraped skin on Trinity's arm, everyone saw clearly. This wasn't a performative act. It was a deliberate choice, a statement. You find this amusing? Amia repeated, her voice lower, firmer. Chad raised an eyebrow. He recognized that tone, not from teachers or adults, but from those unafraid of him. Instinctively he took a small step back, but then forced a smile and stepped forward again. It's none of your concern, he sneered. It is now, Amia replied, standing up. The two faced each other. Chad was taller, broader, his smirk attempting to hide a flicker of unease. Because what Chad couldn't grasp, and might take him a long time to learn, was that silence isn't weakness, and quiet people aren't always easily overcome. Amia didn't argue. She didn't overreact. She simply turned back, gently righted Trinity's wheelchair, and carefully gathered her scattered books. The crowd began to murmur. A few students discreetly pulled out phones to record. Others stared at the ground as if fearing Amia's gaze might find them doing nothing. Hunter shot Chad a hesitant look. Mike took a step back, scratching his head as if the humor had suddenly vanished. Chad clenched his jaw. He wasn't used to being disregarded, especially not by someone outside his usual sphere. She thinks she's something, doesn't she? Chad muttered, a mix of laughter and sneer. Amia didn't turn. She simply asked Trinity in a soft, steady voice, "Are you all right?" Trinity nodded. Her shoulder stung from the scrape and her wrist throbbed, but her eyes brightened, meeting Amia's. In that moment, Trinity's silence found its perfect complement, and something ignited. "Let's go," Amia said, gently but with resolve, pushing Trinity's chair toward the school entrance. Only then did Mr. Lenny Hart, the morning hall monitor, his shirt slightly rumpled, tie crooked, breathing heavily as if he'd just run upstairs, rush over. "What happened here?" he called out. No one responded. Not a single student spoke. Chad looked around. No allies were visible. No words of sympathy were offered. He scowled, shoved his hands into his jacket pockets and walked away, feigning boredom. No one was disciplined. No one was suspended. Like many incidents involving Trinity, it would have likely faded away if nothing had changed. But this time a spark had been struck. A subtle movement Chad never foresaw, couldn't anticipate and couldn't stop. A fire was quietly kindling and a plan was taking shape. Not a single complaint passed Amia's lips. No trace of resentment showed on her face. She wheeled Trinity away from the cluster of onlookers, closing that small, painful chapter. But in her mind, a new strategy was forming. She wasn't one to incite a crowd or orchestrate a public confrontation. However, she grasped something most students don't realize early on. Victory doesn't always belong to the loudest voice. Sometimes, victory means compelling the cruel to hear themselves and recognize how truly unpleasant they sound. That afternoon, while most students headed to the cafeteria for lunch and Chad Benson loudly recounted his morning prank to his friends, Amia knocked on Mrs. Denise Carter's door. Mrs. Carter was not only Amia's homeroom teacher but also the coordinator of the Unity Challenge, a semesterly event designed to promote cooperation, respect, and understanding among students. Mrs. Carter poked her head out, still putting away her lunch container and opening her laptop to check team lists. "Yes, Cross? What can I do for you?" Amia took a steadying breath. She had considered this thoroughly. This wasn't an impulsive reaction. It was a calculated response, an intellectual counter to the morning's emotional pain. "I want to participate in the Unity Challenge this afternoon." Mrs. Carter raised an eyebrow. But I thought your team was already set. Amia shook her head. I'd like to request a change to the teams and I want Chad Benson on mine. An unusual stillness fell over the faculty lounge. Mrs. Carter blinked. A good teacher knows not just when to provide answers, but when to ask the right questions. Are you certain? I am. And I'll tell you why. Amia's gaze was steady. I don't need Chad suspended. I don't want him publicly shamed. I just need him to face what he did, to participate, to cooperate. I want him to see who Trinity is truly and what he has been. A moment of silence. Mrs. Carter closed her laptop and nodded slowly. All right, but you'll need the event committee's approval. They don't typically reshuffle teams based on individual requests. Amia had anticipated this. She had already approached Coach Ramirez, the head of athletics and the only person in the school many students feared more than Principal Gaines. Beneath his gruff exterior lay the heart of an experienced father, and he had long disapproved of Chad, not just for minor infractions, but for the genuine cruelty he displayed. Coach Ramirez agreed to discreetly adjust the lineup so that Chad, Hunter, Mike and Amia would all be placed on the same team. The afternoon arrived bright. On the backfield, organizers had set up obstacle course stations. Rope climbs, sack races, basketball shots, relay runs, and the final event, a wheelchair zigzag push with a baton handoff. The obstacle relay was designed to encourage teamwork and foster empathy. When Mrs. Carter announced the new team rosters, Chad Benson looked up from his phone in surprise. Wait, I'm on her team? His eyes landed on Amia, who held a clipboard calmly at her side. Hunter muttered, "Oh no, we're ambushed." Mike rolled his eyes. I thought this was supposed to be enjoyable. Amia stepped forward, holding out the roster. Welcome to Red Team. I'm your captain and you guys are students who are due for a lesson in empathy. Chad sneered but said nothing. Perhaps because so many were listening. Perhaps because for the first time he couldn't think of a sharp retort. All eyes were on them. Teachers, parents, even Principal Gaines were seated front and center. This was a significant event, live-streamed internally, posted on the school's website and reported to the district. Amia knew it. She didn't choose to confront him in private. She chose the public stage. The final challenge, she announced to her team, her voice clear and strong. The winners get to choose one teammate for lunch with the principal. The losers clean the cafeteria all week. A ripple of anticipation went through the crowd. A few students chuckled. Chad folded his arms. And if I decline to participate? He challenged. Then your entire team forfeits because of your refusal and everyone will know why. Amia's voice wasn't loud, but it struck his pride like a direct hit. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Chad Benson, the formerly self-assured bully, to realize he was now a participant in a game where someone else set the rules. The late afternoon sky was clear. Sunlight streamed across Jefferson's back field like shimmering threads of gold, illuminating the lush green grass and the rows of game stations. The loudspeaker played energetic pop music, punctuated by the lively voice of the supervising teacher. Welcome to the Spring Unity Challenge. Today we... And who gets to clean the cafeteria all week this time? Trinity raised her gaze directly to Chad. Her eyes held no anger but glinted like steel in the sunlight. She didn't need to speak. The rule was the rule. Chad understood. Red Team, including himself, would be scrubbing tables and collecting trash during every lunch period for a full week, awkwardly muttering "excuse me" to the cafeteria staff he had once scorned. Coach Ramirez approached and clapped his hands together 3 firm times. Excellent effort all teams. You performed admirably and thank you Red Team for a truly unforgettable event. Beneath his congratulatory tone was a pointed look toward Chad, an unspoken lesson in sportsmanship the coach had long attempted to instill but which Chad had always dismissed. Chad said nothing. His face was tense, his lips pressed tightly together, pale. From the stands a male voice called out, "Amazing work, Trinity." Another echoed, "You're incredible, Trinity." Trinity remained still. Yet for the first time in a long while she felt genuinely seen, not out of pity but because people acknowledged her strength. Amia gave Trinity's wheelchair a gentle push. "Let's go. This is our moment." As the 2 girls left the field, the sun dipped behind the trees lining the edge. The echoes of applause followed them, mingling with a growing realization among the observers. A quiet but definite shift had occurred. Chad stood rooted in place, silent not because he was defeated, but because for the first time he understood he was no longer the central figure in the story. The price of his arrogance was standing aside while someone else stepped into the light. As Trinity wheeled away, she glanced back not for Chad, but to confirm that something had just lifted from her shoulders. Fear. But for Chad Benson, the fear was just beginning. He couldn't fully articulate why, but every push he had given Trinity's wheelchair during the relay, amidst the cheers, under the gaze of dozens of phone cameras, with hundreds of eyes on him, had exposed something he had always kept hidden, the vulnerability of losing power. That feeling didn't come from the baton in Trinity's hand. It didn't come from the strain of pushing the chair over uneven ground. It came from Trinity's voice. Calm. Precise. Utterly unwilling to be dismissed. A little to the left, not so hard. The chair's tilting. Keep it steady. I don't need speed. I need consistency. That final comment stunned him, not for its content but for its delivery. Cool yet not cold. Clear yet not mocking. It sounded like someone accustomed to being controlled, yet who still asserted her own agency. Chad, who had always dictated the terms, was now being directed, and strangely he found himself unable to object. Jefferson's Field looked flat to most, but only someone like Trinity understood its true contours. Every bump and dip he navigated was a metaphor for the years she had spent wheeling herself across the cold surface of indifference, discrimination, and cruelty. No one had caught her when her wheels snagged on a rut. No one had seen the scrape on her elbow when she fell outside the library entrance that no one would open for her. No one had asked why she arrived 10 minutes early to class. Because she needed every extra second just to get down a hallway. Today Chad had witnessed it all. He had felt every jolt of the chair, heard every quiet instruction from Trinity, sensed the gaze of the onlookers, not with admiration but with scrutiny. The race was over. Trinity held the baton high. Chad stopped behind her, breathing in short gasps, his shirt soaked with sweat. Yet no one paid attention to him. No one offered a handshake. No one asked, "Are you okay?" Because for the first time he hadn't been the one to claim victory. He had been guided to it. After the event, as the crowd began to disperse, Hunter and Mike trailed awkwardly behind him, neither speaking. Hunter tugged at his cap, turning it over in his hands as if avoiding Chad's eyes. Mike stared at his phone, though nothing new had appeared on the screen. "That was strange," Hunter muttered. "Yeah," Mike agreed. Chad didn't respond. He was staring at his muddy, scuffed sneakers, much like the disordered thoughts in his mind that no longer seemed to line up neatly. Later that day in the second-floor club room, Amia sat alone, replaying a student's video of the relay. The clip showed Trinity lifting the baton, sunlight slanting over her shoulder like an unearned halo. But what captured Amia's attention was Chad's face, a raw, exposed expression of uncertainty, shame, and confusion. She paused the frame, not to relish his discomfort or celebrate a personal win, but to remember, change doesn't always happen instantly upon exposure, but exposure is the necessary first step towards it. She jotted a quick note beneath the screenshot. A race on uneven ground and not everyone realizes they're stumbling. At that same moment, Chad sat in the kitchen as his mother called him for dinner. He lingered at the table, a walnut-wood centerpiece adorned with photos of him holding MVP trophies from the basketball court. He studied the largest frame, himself in uniform, clutching a golden cup, grinning widely. A big smile, but not the kind Trinity wore today. One that didn't need to shout, yet quieted an entire field. He stood and removed the photo from its frame. And for the first time in years, Chad Benson wondered if, with the fear of him gone, who was he truly? The relay baton remained firmly in Trinity's hand, held high above her head, steady, unassuming. She held it as a declaration, not, "I have won," but, "I have always been strong." It simply took you this long to see it. In that moment the entire Jefferson Field seemed to pause. Only she remained, bathed in the late afternoon light, the serene face of a black girl in a wheelchair illuminated by the sun. Behind her, Chad Benson stood motionless, his hands still gripping the wheelchair's push rims, as if clinging to a reality that was dissolving beneath him. He didn't dare let go, not for fear she would fall, but because he himself had lost his footing. From the stands the applause began softly. First a few teachers rising to their feet, then scattered groups of students joining in. Soon it surged like wildfire, erupting in cheers, whistles, and calls of "Trinity," echoing across the grass. Amia stood a few paces away, hands on her hips, her gaze fixed on Trinity. She didn't rush forward. She knew Trinity needed this moment to simply be present, to accept the acknowledgement, to exist fully without being overshadowed. In one corner of the stands, Mrs. Carter dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Coach Ramirez stood, arms crossed, nodding slowly as if marking a moment destined for the school's history. Across the field, Principal Gaines, usually a picture of composure, broke into a genuine smile for the first time. He turned to the school videographer and quietly instructed, "Save this clip for the end-of-year ceremony." And Chad? Chad remained rooted in place, unable to move. Not because anyone told him to stay, but because a seismic shift was happening within him. The boy who once saw Trinity's wheelchair as an impediment, who called her a burden on wheels, who had thrown her sprawling like refuse at the school gate, was now the one who had propelled her to the finish line. And that victory? It was his too, just not in the way he had ever understood it. It didn't inflate his ego or pride. It forced him to bow his head for the first time, not to pick something up but to look inward. His eyes scanned the crowd, seeing faces that once laughed with him now regarding him like a stranger. No one jeered. No one cheered for him. Only a strange quiet, the hush reserved for those who have suffered a significant loss. Amia stepped closer. She didn't touch Trinity. She didn't touch Chad. She simply stood beside them, then turned to Principal Gaines and announced clearly, "According to the agreed-upon rules, the winning team selects one member for the leadership lunch. The losing team will clean the cafeteria." Principal Gaines nodded. Trinity turned back, her eyes meeting Amia's. "I choose you." Just 3 words, yet enough to settle any question of who truly inspired everyone that day. Amia smiled and nodded. Then she faced Chad. "And you," she said just as she had at the start, "will cooperate all next week, with the mop." There was no malice in her tone. It was as calm as a verdict delivered without need of a court, because Chad had just confirmed it himself. As Trinity and Amia left the field, the wheelchair rolled slowly, grass dust clinging to its wheels, sunlight gilding their shoulders, one walking, one seated, yet both moving forward with quiet dignity. Trinity said nothing, but in her eyes burned a light no one had ever noticed before. Not the light of triumph, but the light of someone stepping out from the shadows of being overlooked, without compromising herself. Chad remained behind. He slid his hands from the push rims and looked down at them. Dust, sweat, and something he couldn't name. Perhaps shame. Perhaps a dawning awareness. Then he turned and walked away. Not running, not shouting, not reacting. Just silent, like someone who has lost their last weapon, the ability to diminish others. That evening, the relay video circulated through the student network. An anonymous post read, "The boy who knocked her down today pushed her across the finish." And the comment with the most likes below it said, "Sometimes victory isn't about who runs fastest, but who admits they were wrong and still pushes towards what's right." That night, the clip of the final relay appeared on the student forum. No filters, no soundtrack, no edits. Just a shaky phone recording of Trinity holding the baton aloft, and behind her Chad Benson standing silently, like a shadow without substance. Under the video, the very first comment read, "She didn't need someone to help her up. She just needed someone to stop knocking her down." The next afternoon, 3 firm knocks echoed on the door of the second-floor faculty lounge. Amia Cross entered the room. She carried no books, no clipboard, just her composed self, her gaze as clear as a mirror and her tone remarkably calm. Inside sat Mrs. Carter, still organizing student files, and Principal Gaines, positioned behind a dark wooden desk whose edges were smooth from long use. "Principal Gaines, Mrs. Carter," Amia began, offering a polite acknowledgement. "We don't seek his suspension." Mrs. Carter paused, her pen hovering. Principal Gaines rested his hands on the desk, leaning slightly forward to listen. Amia didn't need notes. Every word was imprinted on her mind from the day before. "We seek transformation." Mrs. Carter set down her pen. Principal Gaines remained silent, attentive. Amia pressed on. Everyone witnessed him push Trinity down and abandon her. No one intervened. No one spoke up. No one questioned it. And the alarming truth is that inaction became automatic. A heavy silence settled over the room. Afternoon light slanted through the window, casting intersecting shadows on the desktop, like the crisscrossing lines of an overlooked decision. That must be rectified, Amia continued. Not only for Chad but for everyone who remained silent. Teachers, classmates, this entire school. Principal Gaines, the same man who had once bellowed encouragement through a megaphone at sports events, now simply sat, listening intently. Grant us 10 minutes, Amia requested. At tomorrow morning's all-school assembly, allow Trinity and me to share what needs to be heard. Mrs. Carter glanced at the principal and nodded. No further deliberation was necessary. No committee meeting was scheduled. This request wasn't born of anger but of profound awareness. You will have 10 minutes, Principal Gaines stated. I trust you both will achieve more than 10 years of lectures. The following morning, Jefferson's auditorium was filled to capacity. The plastic seats creaked with every shift. The air hummed with anticipation, apprehension, and a palpable silence. A last-minute announcement mentioned a special presentation. No one knew exactly what awaited them, but everyone stayed, including Chad. He sat near the back, hands clasped, palms damp with sweat. No one had compelled him to be there, yet he knew he had to come, partly out of curiosity, partly because evasion was no longer viable. When Principal Gaines stepped onto the stage, he omitted his usual address, simply stating, "Today, 2 of our students wish to share something, and I believe it warrants us breaking our silence." Amia cross-rolled Trinity Hayes onto the stage. There were no handheld mics, just 2 standing ones. Amia stood while Trinity remained seated, yet there was no disparity in their stature in that moment. Their equality stemmed from the message they were about to deliver, not their physical positions. Amia began, "Yesterday a student was knocked down right outside the school entrance. Someone was injured and dozens of people witnessed it, but not a single person acted." Her voice was measured, not loud, but every ear caught every word. No one coughed or glanced at their phones. Some laughed, some turned away, some pretended not to see. But we are not here today to assign blame. We are here to remind you that silence is also a choice. Amia placed a hand gently on the wheelchair. Trinity continued, "I am Trinity Hayes. I have used this chair for as long as I can remember. I never considered it a problem until your gaze made it one." She paused, taking a steadying breath. "Yesterday I fell, but it was not the first time. I have fallen when my wheels caught cracks in the library path. When a classmate pulled my chair out from under me. When it rained and no one held the door for me. I have fallen many times. But what stays with me is not the fall itself, but who wasn't there to catch me." The auditorium was held captive by an unseen thread of stillness. Trinity gripped the armrest lightly. "I don't require apologies from the entire school. I only require a promise that the next time someone needs help, one person will step forward. Just one person is enough." Amia concluded, "And if you are unsure where to begin, begin in the moments where you chose silence." At the back of the auditorium, Chad stared intently at the floor. For the duration of the presentation he didn't lift his eyes. Yet every word penetrated him, bypassing the uniform he wore like a fragile defense. When the applause finally began, first from the teachers, then swelling like a tide, Chad stood. No one prompted him. He walked towards the aisle. Turning the corner by the library, he saw Trinity and Amia seated side by side, sharing a thin paperback, soft smiles playing on their lips like the first light of dawn. Chad inhaled and approached. He started, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. "I didn't intend for things to go so far. I just thought it was a joke." Amia remained silent. Trinity looked up, her eyes neither cold nor harsh, simply expectant. "I'm sorry," Chad said, his voice stripped bare for the first time. "Truly. I was a jerk." Trinity studied him for a long moment, then gently said, "I forgive you. But I don't need your apology." He blinked, surprised. "I need you to change," she stated. Chad froze, then nodded. I will try. And if that chair ever squeaks," he added hesitantly, "I'm pretty decent with a wrench. I won't break it. Promise." Trinity quirked an eyebrow, not quite a smile but an opening. "We'll see," she replied, then bent to turn a page. Amia murmured, almost to herself but loud enough for him to hear, "And if you genuinely want to make things right, start by listening." Chad nodded again and turned to walk away, this time without looking back. But behind him, the path to forgiveness was no longer out of reach, and the possibility of change had perhaps finally taken root. As Chad Benson walked away from the library corridor, he couldn't yet identify the complex mix of emptiness and relief swelling within him. Perhaps it was the first time he had walked away not to escape, but to acknowledge. And in the vast auditorium across the hall, where Trinity Hayes had just concluded her speech, silence was no longer consent to harm. It had become a state of active listening. That morning, as Trinity and Amia rolled onto the stage, sunlight streamed through the large, spring-colored windows, bathing everything in a soft, warm glow. They weren't wearing matching uniforms like other presenters. Trinity sat in her wheelchair, her white blouse slightly creased, one hem draped over a wheel. Amia wore a black t-shirt with "Listen Louder" printed on it. No one stood to applaud as they took their places. There was no dramatic music, no blinding spotlights, only a tense, quiet anticipation. Amia lifted the microphone, her hands steady, her eyes scanning the packed rows of students crammed shoulder to shoulder, but this time without the usual hushed chatter or surreptitious phone checks. "She didn't fall because of her wheelchair," Amia said, her voice low and deliberate. "She fell because someone decided she deserved to." The room fell silent. Those words didn't just call out the wrongdoer. They challenged every single person present. She handed the microphone to Trinity. Trinity gripped it, raising it to her lips. "I'm Trinity Hayes," she began, her gaze steady. "I've lived in this chair for as long as I can remember. I never saw it as a barrier until your eyes turned it into a wall." No one laughed. No one whispered. She continued, every word sinking in like rain on dry earth. "I didn't fall from tiredness. I fell because I was shoved by someone who thought it was funny. But what truly hurt wasn't the fall. It was watching everyone just stand there, doing nothing, saying nothing. No one extended a hand." Her voice remained calm, yet it carried immense weight. It wasn't an angry shout. It was the sound of a hope that had been suppressed for too long finally breaking through. "My mother works 2 jobs to pay for repairs when this chair breaks. I've spent nights teaching myself how to get back up alone when there was no one there to help me. I'm not a character in some feel-good movie. I'm just a girl who wants to attend school, to be heard, to be respected." A deeper hush fell over the audience. "I don't need your sympathy," she stated. "I just need you to understand that I am not weak. I don't need to stand to prove my strength. I just need never to be forced to lower my head." Something shifted in the crowd. A few students dropped their gazes. A few clenched their fists. In a middle row, Hunter Sloan bit his lip. Mike Radley, for the first time, looked genuinely uncomfortable. Amia stepped forward. "Change doesn't come solely from speeches. It comes from small actions, a glance without judgment, a gentle reminder when someone crosses a boundary, a hand offered not out of pity but out of genuine respect." She turned to Trinity, who gave a slight nod. "We don't expect the entire school to transform overnight," Amia concluded. "We only need one person starting today, starting with anyone in this room." And then silence, not the oppressive kind but the kind that awaits action. When the applause finally came, it wasn't the roaring ovation of a sports victory. It was measured, spontaneous, heartfelt, spreading outward like a shared heartbeat, as if Jefferson Middle School was learning to acknowledge worth without needing a flashy display. Principal Gaines walked onto the stage afterward and, without speaking, placed a hand on both Amia's and Trinity's shoulders. A simple gesture, but heavier with meaning than any formal commendation. At the conclusion of the assembly, Chad remained behind. He hadn't chosen a seat in the back this time, he'd sat in the center. As Trinity rolled past on her way out, Chad stood quietly. He didn't speak, but his eyes met hers without evasion, without arrogance, without excuse. And Trinity nodded just once, gently, not as a full pardon, but like a door finally closing, yet left intentionally ajar. The resonance of that morning's assembly lingered throughout Jefferson Middle School like a slow-burning ember, never igniting into open conflict but subtly permeating every hallway, bench, elevator, and bulletin board, spaces where indifference had once been common. Finally, Chad Benson stepped out of the auditorium. No one stopped him. No one moved aside for him as before. But this time his sense of isolation didn't come from being ignored. It came from everyone genuinely seeing him, truly observing him. No more feigned admiration in their eyes. No more politically motivated pats on the back. Just direct gazes, neither hateful nor adoring, but the looks of people questioning, is this really the same Chad? and that was suffocating to him. The second-floor corridor felt quieter than usual. He walked slowly past the familiar classroom doors where he used to nudge others or erupt in laughter when a teacher's back was turned. Today, everything was subdued, as if the school itself was allowing him space to hear his own thoughts and recognize their emptiness. When he neared the library entrance, once a territory he only passed through to taunt, he saw two familiar figures. Amia Cross sat on the stone steps outside, smiling, a small notebook in her hand. Beside her, Trinity Hayes leaned forward, head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with soft laughter. They appeared strikingly ordinary. They weren't scanning their surroundings. They weren't pretending to be triumphant. They weren't playing the victim. They were simply two 13-year-old girls sharing a quiet laugh after class like any other kids. And for Chad, that resonated most deeply because he had never known how to laugh like that. So freely, so unguarded. He paused less than 6 feet away. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from uncertainty about how to speak as the boy who had caused harm. One hand gripped his backpack strap. The other scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. Then he stepped forward. Trinity looked up first. Her eyes showed no surprise, no defensiveness, only a calm readiness to listen. Amia tilted her head, silent, allowing him to find his words. Chad began, his voice rough and strained. Pause. I didn't mean for things to escalate like that, he continued, his eyes fixed on the space between them. I just thought it was a joke. Amia didn't blink, her arms folded, her expression neither cold nor immediately forgiving, as if waiting not for excuses but for genuine honesty. Chad exhaled. I'm sorry, he said, this time looking directly at Trinity. Not a fake sorry. I know I was completely out of line. Trinity said nothing for a few seconds. Sunlight slanted across the library skylight, pale gold light sliding across her cheek and highlighting the still fresh scrape on her right elbow. Then she spoke, her voice as gentle as a spring breeze. I forgive you, Chad. He blinked, barely believing his ears. But Trinity went on, but I don't need your apology. Chad stopped, his lips pressed together. Trinity met his gaze, unflinching. I need you to do better. Not for me but for anyone who comes after me. Anyone treated the way I was. Those words weren't heavy, but they seemed to knock the last vestiges of Chad's pride to the ground. He nodded. No grand declaration, no elaborate promise. Just a small, sincere nod. I'll try. And if that wheelchair is still making noise, he added almost as an offering, I happen to be pretty handy with a wrench. I won't break it. Promise. Trinity quirked an eyebrow, not quite a smile but an open gesture. We'll see, she said, then bent to turn a page. Amia murmured, just loud enough. And you? If you truly want to do what's right, start by listening. Chad nodded again and turned to walk away without looking back. But behind him, the prospect of forgiveness felt attainable, and the path towards genuine change had perhaps finally begun. That afternoon, in the quiet library aisles under the cool fluorescent lights, the two girls sat together in silence, reading an old poem. They didn't speak of Chad again. They had said what needed to be said, and the rest of the transformation rested with everyone else. When Chad Benson walked away, his steps were deliberate, not from hesitation, but because for the first time he wasn't burdened by his usual heavy ego. That brief exchange wasn't an ending. It was a quiet beginning, a single rest note after the constant noise he had always created. And in that silence something began to stir, not with explosive fanfare but enough to cause a ripple. The next day at Jefferson a gentle rain fell. The sky was a dull gray, hallways cool and damp. Yet the school somehow felt warmer. For the first time in months, Trinity Hayes didn't have to strain to hold the classroom door open for herself. As she approached, a boy named Marcus stood and quietly held it. No words, no theatrics, just a simple act. But Trinity noticed. During homeroom, Mrs. Carter spoke about the power of silence, a topic that was officially scheduled as career guidance. No one objected. That day the entire class was eager to listen. In the cafeteria, Chad Benson and his two friends Hunter and Mike were wearing plastic gloves, wiping down tables, finally interacting with the cafeteria staff as equals, not as entitled customers or Mr. Benson's kid. Chad said nothing. He focused on the work in silence. When someone spilled orange juice on the third table, he didn't call for help. He grabbed a rag himself. He still found it hard to say, I'm sorry. But he was starting to understand how to listen through action. In the teacher's lounge, Mrs. Carter recounted something to Principal Gaines that left him nodding silently. This morning, Chad arrived early. He stood outside the lounge door for nearly 5 minutes before knocking. He didn't ask for any favors. He simply asked, "May I stay and listen to the teacher meeting on supporting students with disabilities?" Principal Gaines removed his glasses and wiped them on his shirt. He said nothing, just nodded slowly and surely. A week after the assembly, a new announcement appeared by the library, printed on pale yellow paper. Circle of sharing, where every student is both heard and listens. Every Friday, room 204. No grades, no judgment. Proposed by Amia Cross. First participant, Trinity Hayes. Third name listed, awkwardly scrolled, Chad Benson. At that first circle of sharing meeting, when a 7th grader named Lana, affected by being labeled an invisible nerd, finished sharing her story, the room felt thick with emotion. She didn't cry, but her eyes were red. Chad sat across from her. He didn't speak immediately. Then, hesitantly, he raised his hand. "I used to be the one who silenced others because I thought I had the right," he confessed. "Now, I'm here to learn when to stay silent and when to speak up." Lana looked at him, surprised. Another student quietly nodded, and Amia, the facilitator, didn't smile, but her eyes lit up. Not because Chad was miraculously reformed, but because he had genuinely begun to listen. One late afternoon, after most students had left, Chad slipped into the library. Trinity was still there, reviewing posters for School Inclusion Month art projects with a friend named Lena. Chad didn't approach right away. But when Trinity looked up and met his eyes, he held out a small blue plastic piece, a spare wheelchair part. "I noticed your chair is still making noise," he said. "Maybe swapping this will help." No pressure, no expectation of thanks. Trinity studied it for a moment. Then, instead of saying thank you, she said, "I was wondering if you'd remember to bring it." Chad actually laughed. A genuine, unmocking sound, like someone finally able to remove a constricting mask. "You win," he said. Trinity replied, "I'm not playing to win. I just want to be heard without needing to shout." That night, on the school's digital bulletin board, the motto was changed. It used to read, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Now it read, "Listen more closely to the silence." No attribution was given. But everyone at Jefferson knew. Came from the kid who had once been the loudest. The effects of that morning's assembly lingered throughout Jefferson Middle School like a slow-burning fog, never erupting into flames, but subtly permeating every hallway, every bench, every elevator, every bulletin board, places where apathy had once ruled. Chad Benson was the last to exit the auditorium. No one blocked his path. No one even moved aside for him as they used to. But this time his feeling of being alone wasn't due to being ignored. It was because everyone was truly looking at him, genuinely observing him. No more false admiration in their eyes. No more superficial praise. Just direct gazes, neither hostile nor idolizing, but the eyes of people asking themselves, "Is this really the same Chad?" And that feeling was almost suffocating to him. That afternoon, the circle of sharing officially took root, evolving from what had been a brief special session. Room 204, once the seldom-used French club meeting space, became a Friday sanctuary for students from every grade level. There were no elevated teacher chairs. Everyone sat in an equal circle. No microphones, no grades, just stories that had been trapped inside young throats, finally given voice. The kids who had once been the loudest in class were now learning the value of quiet and how to allow others to speak. And among the names that appeared faithfully every week was one who remained quiet during those initial sessions. Chad Benson. He wasn't compelled to attend. No one forced him, but he arrived on time, sat in the same spot, hands resting on his knees, back straight, as if waiting for a signal he couldn't yet name. At first, others whispered, "Isn't that the guy?" This circle was created because of people like him. Yet over time they realized Chad hadn't come to erase his past. He had come to confront his mistakes, examining them closely until he could no longer look away. One Friday afternoon in April after gym class, Trinity Hayes was running late for lunch. She wheeled down the hall, the soft clicking of her chair's wheels a sound she no longer felt ashamed of. She had learned to let it be heard like a declaration. Approaching the lunch tables, she paused. The long table by the windows, the only spot she could usually find, often by the trash cans or the humming AC unit, had a small sign waiting for her, cut from cardstock, edges taped with yellow, the handwriting uneven but clear, reserved for Trinity and those who refused to stay silent. He looked around. No one lurking, no phones recording. This wasn't a joke. On the table were 3 lunch trays already laid out. One for Amia, one for Lena, the 7th grader who had shared at the circle, and one for Chad. Chad wasn't sitting there, but his chicken sandwich was still warm. His milk carton unopened. A napkin bore a hastily scribbled quote. "Today we listen. Tomorrow we speak." Trinity wheeled into the spot. She said nothing, but for the first time in years of eating alone, she didn't have to search for a place. A place had been created for her. In classrooms, teachers began revising their lesson plans. Instead of researching historical heroes, students were asked to write about a moment of real courage they had witnessed on campus. A 6th grader named Jordan moved Mrs. Carter to pause the class for a few minutes. "I saw a hero who didn't wear a cape," he shared. "She was in a wheelchair, but she helped me when I twisted my ankle on the playground. She didn't fly. She didn't shout. She just stayed quiet and did what was needed." The cafeteria, once a hub of gossip and casual cruelty, now hosted a student-led broadcast every Wednesday spotlighting, "One thing I stayed silent about and now I want to share." One week it was Chad's turn. His voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "I used to be the loudest person in the room," he admitted. "So today I'm taking 1 minute to say nothing at all, to create space for the voices I used to drown out. Thank you for not being silent as I once hoped you would be." The entire school observed a full minute of silence, not because it was a rule, but because everyone understood this silence was a form of respect. By mid-April, Principal Gaines displayed a new poster on the bulletin board, designed by the 8th grade art club. It depicted a black girl in a wheelchair and another girl standing beside her, holding a relay baton. They faced forward, not towards the viewer. Above them, painted in bold letters, "Respect doesn't ask permission." No names were included, but everyone at Jefferson Middle School knew exactly who they were. For the first time in years, the school didn't need a new rulebook to teach behavior, but a living example to follow. That year, the spring talent show at Jefferson Middle School started like any other, but it concluded with a moment no one would forget. Beneath the warm amber stage lights, between the annual hip-hop dances, ukulele performances and comedic sketches, 2 girls stepped out. No props, no backing track, no special effects. Just 2 microphones and an audience holding its collective breath. Amia Cross stood tall, wearing a white t-shirt emblazoned with, "Softness is not surrender." Trinity Hayes rolled her wheelchair to her side, chin lifted, her hair braided neatly by her mother, her lips pressed together as if containing a song she had long carried. No introduction was needed. Amia spoke first, her voice steady as a heartbeat. "They say quiet girls cannot lead." Trinity picked up the line, her voice soft as silk yet striking the ear like a sharp blade. "But I once saw someone use silence to break through prejudice." The auditorium fell completely silent. Their next lines intertwined like delicate lace woven with strong thread. "I was once a question in other people's eyes. Now I am the period at the end of every rumor. I used to be the squeak in a silent hallway. Now I am the steady rhythm others follow." They didn't need to raise their voices. The entire school leaned in like trees bending to a strong spring wind. In the back row, Trinity's mother, wearing a faded lavender dress, stood with her arms crossed, tears falling silently. She had once told her daughter, "Don't hope they see you, Trinity. Make them listen." And now everyone was listening. Amia concluded, "We are not standing on a mountaintop. We are simply rising above bias." A single beat of awe-filled silence followed. Not the awkward hush of forced politeness, but the stunned stillness of genuine admiration. Then, like a coiled spring finally released, the applause erupted. No one remained seated. Jefferson's auditorium rose to its feet, recognizing they had witnessed something unforgettable. In a middle row, Chad Benson sat beside his younger brother, a 6th grader. His little brother's eyes were wide as he whispered, "She's so cool." Chad nodded slowly without a smile or an empty phrase, just a quiet murmur to himself. "See? That's real strength. Not a punch, not a shout, but the calm that dismantles crumbling walls." That very evening at the school council meeting, a teacher unexpectedly raised her hand and said, "I'm not here to discuss the budget. I just want to say that today, I relearned how to be a teacher, thanks to two 8th grade girls. 3 weeks later, a video of Trinity and Amia's spoken word performance was posted on the school website, then shared across state education forums. It accumulated over 14,000 views in a month. High schools everywhere began inquiring, who coached them? And Jefferson replied, they weren't coached. They simply articulated what no one else dared to say. The following Monday, Trinity entered class as usual. No fanfare, no grand entrance. But on her desk lay a small card, handwriting slanted across it. I used to mock how fast you moved. Now I see you race in a different way. Thank you for never stopping. No name was signed. Trinity folded the card and tucked it into her pocket. She didn't need to know who wrote it, just that someone had been listening. In his office, Principal Gaines pinned the new poster next to the old school motto. He didn't remove the old one, he simply added a handwritten line below it. True voices require no permission to be heard. That nameless card still rests in the small left-hand pocket of Trinity's backpack, alongside a worn penny and the unfinished draft of a poem she's never read aloud. But she keeps them, small tokens of the unspoken, the powerful things yet to be said. By the close of the school year, spring breezes flowed through every windowpane at Jefferson. White magnolia blossoms lined the walkways, and sparrows flitted across the yard as if winter had never occurred. Yet this year Jefferson changed for reasons beyond the season. It changed because of a quiet, irreversible transformation. At the final meeting of the Student Diversity Council, Amia Cross was elected its new chair, unopposed, no campaign needed. She was chosen not for speaking the most, but for articulating truths no one else had dared to utter. Chad Benson was also present. He sat in the back, didn't raise his hand, didn't deliver a speech. Yet at the end of the meeting he was the first to stand, wipe the whiteboard clean and tidy the tables. No one told him to, no one was surprised. Meanwhile, Trinity Hayes began her next chapter at Washington High, a significantly larger school with modern elevators and smoothly sloped hallways accessible to wheelchairs. But what brought a smile to her face wasn't just the new architecture. It was the group of 9th graders who greeted her on the first day, their name tags reading, "Welcome, Trinity. We know who you are." She hadn't become notable for a speech. She was known for having the courage to be herself when everyone else wished she would fade into silence. One intensely bright summer afternoon, Trinity and her mother returned to Selma, the place her mother had grown up, where civil rights marchers had once faced barriers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. They spoke little as they rolled across the bridge, but each turn of Trinity's wheels on the pavement echoed something ancient and undeniably profound. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "People think courage is about standing up and shouting," she said. Trinity gazed ahead, sunlight catching the weathered iron of the bridge like a spotlight on history. "But sometimes," she replied softly, "courage is about remaining seated and still moving forward. No flags, no drumbeats, just one more rotation of the wheels, one more day at school, one more time without yielding." Back at Jefferson just before summer break, something unexpected appeared on the main hallway wall. A new mural. No announcement, no ribbon cutting. One Monday morning it was simply there. 2 girls, one standing, one seated in a wheelchair, both facing forward. No borders, no names, no identifying features. Just their gazes, their sense of equality. Above them, painted in bold letters, "Respect doesn't ask permission." Principal Gaines stood admiring the mural, coffee cup in hand, flanked by Mrs. Carter and several teachers. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Mrs. Carter exhaled softly, "They don't need us to teach them anymore. They are teaching us." Principal Gaines nodded, his eyes fixed on the girl in the wheelchair. "And they're teaching us without shouting," he added, "just by refusing to remain silent." Summer arrived and Jefferson grew quiet like any school between terms. But in emptied lockers a few things remained, a note reading, "Are you okay today?" an old Circle of Sharing poster, and a small mirror taped inside a locker door with words written in marker, "I don't have to be tall to be seen." In a hallway corner, Chad leaned his shoulder against the wall, watching the mural. A 6th grader walked by and asked, "Do you know who the girl in the wheelchair is?" Chad smiled. He didn't answer immediately. Then after a few seconds, "I don't just know her. I used to be the reason she fell. And now, I want to be the reason no one else falls." The boy looked at him as if he had just heard something significant. Chad turned and walked on, his shoulder still marked with paint from helping to finish the mural the previous day. A small stain but also a promise. There are actions that require no words. Heroes who don't need to stand to be visible, and stories that, while beginning with a fall, culminate in a community rising together. Trinity never had to raise her voice to be heard. Amia never needed power to ignite change. And Chad, the one who once stood on the wrong side, learned to stand on the right side by truly listening. What about you? Have you ever witnessed a small action that transformed a whole group? Share that story in the comments below because your story could be the spark someone else needs. If you believe this story is worth sharing, please hit like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another inspiring narrative. True strength doesn't require standing tall. Sometimes, it only requires the courage not to fall.